something that actually got me really interested in your work early on was through studying film and being in love with like old Woody Allen films and stuff. And it's like, oh, I get to play with all this footage from New York. You've got to be sensitive to the culture that you're dealing with, but ultimately we're all kind of telling the same stories and they all flow in the same way.
Steve, you are being recorded.
Okay, I'm fine with that. Do I need to give consent?
No, you've given implied consent. Hello, today for my long form series, I'll have a conversation with Steve Milligan. Steve is a filmmaker, video editor, and I'd say a talented creative, and most of all, the editor of this channel. Recently, Steve also visited his local Orthodox enclave in Manchester, UK, to document the Purim going-ons for my channel, which was the first time I brought you something from beyond New York City. I invited Steve today to discuss the making of, the view behind the camera, the view behind the footage, and the overall experience we've had working on this project. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much.
What's it like to be in front of the camera for a change?
You know what? People ask me that, and I started out like making stupid videos of myself and my friends when I was in my teens. So like the whole life in front of the lens thing, I'm quite comfortable with it now. But it's a skill into itself, like being able to talk into a lens. Like most people don't have it. For me, myself, like this is fine. I'm comfortable with this.
You're comfortable with that. I think you're more comfortable with the camera than I am. I'm not really comfortable with the camera. I don't like it either. It's such an obstructive way of trying to communicate. Like it comes between the person, the people you're talking to.
Yeah, but I spend an inordinate amount of time talking to myself anyway, so it's just sort of second nature at this point.
Okay, so let's do this. How about introduce yourself? Who are you? Where in the world are you? And also, what's your relationship to the Jewish community? You'll laugh.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, because that one's going to be a very short answer. So I am a filmmaker, educated as a filmmaker up to a master's level, which I thoroughly discourage people from doing. I think you may as well just buy a camera at 15 and just and go out and shoot things. But really, that's kind of all I did it for, to get my hands on equipment and start making films. I started out making stupid videos for myself, went on to making stupid videos for other people, and then that evolved into doing weddings and then doing sort of commercial work and things like that. Ultimately, and this is a really cliche answer and I hate saying it, but ultimately it's true, I consider myself a storyteller. As an editor, I think that's your primary thing. It's to find a narrative in whatever you're doing. And I think it kind of, I always feel like that kind of shows in my work, whether I'm doing really kind of like stodgy corporate work that's supposed to be very serious, I still try and find kind of like an emotive through line. That very much describes my style. And I've been doing it freelance for 3 years, but professionally for about 10, thereabouts, I think. So that's my history. As far as my relationship with the Jewish community goes.
Where are you located in the world?
Oh, where am I? Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I missed that part. So I'm in Cheshire in the UK, which is, it's in the middle of everything. I'm an hour from Birmingham, I'm an hour from Manchester, I'm an hour from Liverpool, and about 3 to 4 hours from London, depending on how your driving is. Yeah, so I'm just kind of like out in the sticks, out in the countryside. You think England, rolling fields and hills and meadows. That's me. That's where I am.
It was just a little bit like what we see in the footage of the Purim segment you shot, where there are like these UK style houses and the cul-de-sacs, the winding streets.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Manchester's, for me, it's kind of big city. But realistically, like the actual, we were in Salford filming that, which is like a town within a town. Like that, so Manchester's just kind of a city surrounded by these small towns. But Manchester itself, like I can't imagine like how it is living in New York. The city centre of Manchester, you can walk across from one side to the other in half an hour. and then you're on your way out of Manchester, and that's walking. Like I looked at I followed one of your routes before when I was editing your footage. Yeah, it was when we were considering doing was it a bike ride and
Okay,
up
Bedford
Bedford
Avenue.
maybe?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
we were gonna go
And
from the bottom end of Bedford Avenue to the top, which is 10.3 miles.
yeah, and that's just it. And like just if you took that ride, you'd have covered Manchester twice. Like it's I'm not kind of I'm not used to that sort of sprawling metropolis.
Yeah, but Manhattan is very concentrated. It's really just Brooklyn that you start to get that sprawling distance.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, what's your relationship with the Jewish community? We're dying to know the suspense.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not OTD.
You're not
I
OCD. What's OCD? My viewers don't. Not all of them have caught up.
well, I didn't know until I was editing your videos. I'm not off the derrick. I was never on the path. I avoid all paths at all costs. I have no relationship with the Jewish community. Something that actually got me really interested in your work early on was through studying film and being in love with like old Woody Allen films and stuff. And it's like, oh, I get to play with all this footage from New York. Like that was part of the early appeal to me. And that was all like the scene setting. So like the kind of music that I choose to use and things like that, it was all kind of based on what this kind of romanticized kind of idea that I have of what people in New York do and live like.
I think we see some degree of that because the content is not overly Jewy. Like I think there isn't the klezmer music with
No.
the style we feel that
Yeah, and like I mean part of that is um not being kind of in touch with the culture myself. Like I couldn't tell if you were to play me two songs, like I wouldn't know if one was a holiday song and one was just a pop song. Like I would have no idea. So I do worry about making mistakes like that, but also it was kind of an active choice to open it up to a broader audience. And I feel like you can kind of look through your comment section. That's kind of worked because it there's there isn't it doesn't cater to one audience. You have a very clear thing divide when in the comments under your videos of like, oh, we're really interested in the culture, like what's going on here, to people who are actively kind of involved in the culture, who think who appreciate the work that you're doing.
yeah.
And I feel like if you lent too far in either of those directions, you'd end up sort of cutting one side out.
Yes, keeps it to a sort of broader audience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did you have no connection with a Hasidic community at all? Like, did you even know there were Hasidic
No,
world?
I knew of it because that sort of that section of Manchester, Salford, and a few other parts around, and even in London, although I can't remember the name of the area in London in particular. I have driven through those areas, and it's not something I ever really considered. Like it's something that kind of strikes me at the time where it's like, oh, suddenly you kind of in another world. And then suddenly 2 blocks later, you're out of it again. You don't really kind of understand what happened there. But it's not something I ever kind of read into like beyond that, because we've got the same kind of where we live, but it's not a Hasidic community. It's a Sikh community. So you're in a very kind of blue collar British kind of working class area. And then suddenly you're in this completely different place that's selling saris and is at the same time like a very kind of I don't know the right word, like an insular community, like businesses run by the people there to
Yeah.
sell to the people there. It's like entering another state, another country, and then again a few blocks later you're out of it again. So I wasn't unaware of like the existence of these insular communities, but I wasn't in any way intimately aware of anything to do with the Hasidic community or the Orthodox community.
Yeah. You know what I find interesting is that you seem to be, at least what I see, fairly non-judgmental. I don't know. Okay, for the record, this is the first time we're talking live, right? You work
Hmm.
almost entirely on your own. I almost
Yes.
you figure out the footage. I send it to you. I don't know what you're thinking. I don't know what your reaction is, and I'm most of all surprised that you figure it out without asking for anything. I sometimes wonder if you're the kind of guy who, if you're lost, will refuse to ask for directions because you seem to figure it
Um,
out on your own. And this is not stuff, unless you Google it. Are you finding anything on Google?
if there's translations and things like that, if it seems like something easy and that I can sort of roughly spell by the sound of it, then then I'd rather kind of look that stuff up and than come at you with more translations than's necessary. But most of the time you figure it out. I mean, it goes back to sort of storytelling. Like you've got to be sensitive to the culture that you're dealing with, but ultimately we're all kind of telling the same stories and they all flow in the same way. Just to go back to basics, it's very everything is sort of beginning, middle, end, and it doesn't really matter what the context of that is. I always feel like we're very kind of hardwired to take in information via stories more so than we are anything else. Any wedding videographer that's kind of come out and done like 100 of them will be so hot on telling stories, like they because they understand the beats of everything that's happening throughout that day. And then once you've got that, it's almost like seeing the Matrix. Like in all of the footage that you take in, you can isolate these moments, the high points and the low points, and what leads best into what. Ultimately, I don't think that changes. I don't think the content, the cultural content, really matters that much. I don't even think the language barrier matters that much. Like I got friends that are in love with Bollywood films and they have no idea what's going on. But
They don't understand. Well, you can get subtitles.
you can, but even subtitle films are kind of like rough translations. So like my wife loves sort of Japanese culture and Japanese animations and stuff like that. And there's there's two sides to it. There's people who will only watch dubbed, which means that the audio is kind of English and spoken over the top. And then there's the other ones who will only read subtitles because that's the truer translation. And so if neither one is right, but you're both getting the same sort of story, then stories sort of created by feeling. So the culture of it doesn't really make a difference to me. It's nice to be able to tell stories from different cultures and to introduce those elements, but ultimately, the 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 language of the culture that you're using is kind of irrelevant to me. You're always kind of trying to aim for the same beats. It's almost like making music. You can listen to music from any culture.
Yeah. So when I send you footage, which is just we're walking through the neighborhood, what do you look?
Yeah, I'll make like a very long timeline of sort of any time that you've spoken throughout the day, and that sort of starts the initial kind of thing. And then you cut that down to kind of just the interesting beats. And then you rearrange those beats into something that feels like it kind of makes sense. So what would you do here? Oh, what's the pacing of this bit? What's going on in this bit? I still think like the best one that I made for you was like the chicken ritual one. Like that was for some reason that one stuck with me. And it's just because you're going from place to place, and for anyone that kind of doesn't understand the culture or is clued in on what's going on, it would seem like it would seem like chaos. So the interesting thing around that to me was to kind of try and sew it together in a way that's having you give enough context before seeing different things to just sort of tamper the edge on that blade. So whenever something's kind of introduced to the audience beyond that point, they can then look at it with a more kind of constructive eye, as opposed to just because I feel like that kind of subject could just be played for shock.
Yeah.
And there's it's thoroughly unnecessary to do that for the sake of making a good video. Like there's other ways to do it.
I actually interviewed someone for the position of camera person, and he said, I explained that in the project I'm planning to, I haven't done it, but I've been planning it for a long time. We would take a bus that is gender segregated. And he said, oh, that's great. That's great. We'll play the Rosa Parks too.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I think, but
Oh,
I appreciate that you intuitively understand that that is not,
it's not necessary.
it's not necessary. It doesn't do
And
anything except what it memifies the whole conversation. That's what I feel.
well, it just serves to further isolate people, and that seems like the exact opposite thing that you're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you saying? What do you think you cut out? Like, what do you think you see that the viewer doesn't end up seeing? I mean, it's hard to say because I know I can't really explain what I see that the viewer doesn't see because I see the footage itself differently than they see it, right? We don't have fresh.
Yeah.
But what do you think ultimately is behind the scenes privy that if people were to see it, they would understand maybe parts of the story that they don't now?
It's a sensitive kind of subject, but I think we are kind of forcing a perspective where it might seem people in the community are much more kind of accepting of you, or kind of like because
Seems to the viewer more so
yeah,
than
because yeah, because a lot of the stuff that I cut out is paying sort of very close attention to if you're in a store, if you're in a very public place, even if you're just walking through the street, if someone's got kind of an off kind of facial expression from just that sort of minor thing to the point where they're kind of like hiding their face or trying to rush by, that goes immediately. Like that hits the floor, and I just don't use it because I can't tell from my vantage point if they're doing that because they don't like being filmed, or if for any number of reasons it seems disrespectful for me to kind of show that sort of thing, and that shyness implicates like a closed offness of that community that I think gets lost when you cut it out, but it kind of needs to be cut out to be respectful.
yeah, no, I appreciate exactly what you're saying. I wonder if also you're seeing people be more friendly and then asking not to be shown. Are you seeing that a lot? Because
I do see that. Yeah. There is a lot of that where people are happy to approach you and talk to you, and you that one of the first things you always say to them is like, "Is we're filming right now? Do you mind?"
yeah.
And most of the time, they will say, oh, no, I don't want to be on camera." Not in a horrible way, but just and I can't tell from my vantage point if it's the same as just anyone else in society that like around here that could, because a lot of people don't like being on camera, or if that's something that's kind of baked into the community through like sort of mistrust, and I kind of don't want to be involved in that world.
No, what it really is that people don't want attention. This is a world where if you are on camera, everyone will tell you, "Oh, we saw you," and I cannot articulate why that is such a terrible thing, but there are possibilities for actual ramifications. For instance, I'm trying so hard. I'm making so many phone calls trying to get for access to a woman to show me her Passover prep, which is probably not going to happen. And someone came back to me yesterday and said, no one will do it because their children will be kicked out of school. So the fear is that I think it's a fear. I think people are just being very anxious, but the fear is that the undue attention will cause actual ramifications in the community, which is interesting because I just now saw this new video I sent you that was going to be published by that YouTuber.
Oh, I've not watched that yet. I meant to watch that before we did this. Yeah, I know the one you
No,
mean.
that's fine. It wasn't homework. It wasn't homework. It's 43 long minutes. It's not much. You're not missing anything. But people were saying, oh, you should. So Binsky, who's the YouTuber, took a walk with the guide who is ex-acidic transgender. So as you can imagine, People had a lot to say about that, especially about, oh, you want access to the community, don't come with a person who's not in good standing in the community. If you came with the right person, people would let you in. But I don't think so. I don't think people here in this community generally want to be on camera. And that's why what Pearl did was so enormous, because she took a risk. People weren't all extremely enthusiastic about her putting herself out there. People were like, why do you have to go on YouTube? What business do you have doing that? But she's one out of thousands of people who will talk to me but will not talk to me on camera because they were afraid. I don't know that anything tangibly would happen, but there was kind of a fear. That's what's happening.
Mm.
And that's
I
how
mean,
I see it when I tell people we have a camera. It's like, I know you're afraid of the camera.
yeah. Is this sort of I guess that there must be like a history of being burned by media outlets and things like that.
Is true. That is true. There's a history of negative attention around media, but I think it also boils down to very simply attention altogether is in a world that is very gossipy, it's not a good thing. Like, you must see that people recognize me, right?
Yeah, yeah,
I have
yeah,
not
yeah, yeah, definitely.
once, not even once, has someone in the rest of the city stopped me and said, "Oh, I saw." Never, never. I have a tiny channel, but I
Yeah,
walk in Williamsburg, I can't go a block without people recognizing me because it's like,
I guess things get spread around.
yeah, very quickly.
Yeah, it's but see that I mean, that's kind of the attitude I was expecting when I went to Manchester, and I was really tense about it because I was like, well, I don't want to annoy anybody, but I'm interested to see what's going on. And people were asking me kind of like, what are you doing here? What is it you're shooting and everything like that. But it was all just curiosity. Like they weren't, but as soon as I kind of told them what I was doing, they was posing for the camera and running to get their friends and things like that. And the kids in particular were all kind of very kind of aware of YouTube and everything, which from watching your stuff I wasn't expecting at all. But then now, in retrospect, apparently the two kind of communities are a very sort of different side of the religion. Like one's much more conservative than the other. I think you said the one in Manchester is modern Orthodox. I should have done my homework and and figured out what the difference there was. Yeah, I was going in fully expecting that level of conservatism, particularly after this. This was a few days after seeing your camera guy get screamed at
Oh yeah.
on one of the pieces of footage, and I was like, I don't know if I've got the nervous system for that today.
Yeah, that's
Um, um,
nothing like that.
no, no, everyone was really nice. I mean, to be fair to them, and it might be because I carry a stupidly big camera around compared to a lot of people, but they all thought I was from the news or from like a magazine or something. Um,
Uh, because yeah, that makes sense. It makes sense to me. It was interesting that they thought you were from the news. I don't know if you noticed, sometimes we'll take a picture of a kid, or we had this, I threw away the footage, but there was this little kid who we were trying to get what's it called when you let footage roll for a long time?
oh, like a time lapse.
Time lapse. So anyway, we're trying to get a time lapse, and these two Hasidic brothers come over, and they're like standing there, and they're waiting for us to take a picture. And I said, "We're good. We got you. That's great. Thank you for posing." But they're waiting for the click because
Yeah,
they're not very exposed to the concept of video, and the fact that the kids in Manchester thought you were the news tells me they're a lot more exposed because they're not thinking it's a
there
camera.
that would now there is that. However, most of them that were posing for me were posing for pictures.
Oh
I
yeah.
had to tell I like I that I told them kind of like who I was and what I was doing and everything like that. But you can see all the boys just kind of like standing around like still and getting into these weird poses and stuff. I think they were very much kind of expecting photographs. So maybe it's something that hasn't quite kind of translated. Maybe that's something that's still sort of a little bit behind on the times for them. I don't know.
Well, let me tell you what you saw. You tell me where I'm wrong.
Okay.
You were in a very diverse community. There are Hasidim, just like in Williamsburg and Borough Park there. So the long side curls are Hasidim, and then there are more Orthodox that are not Hasidic. So the Orthodox that are not Hasidic don't have side curls or have very short ones and are much more exposed. So they might think you're the news. So there are neighborhoods like that in different places where it's a more mixed demographic. What I saw looking at your footage coming away from my impression of Manchester was that it seemed to be a very diverse neighborhood of different levels of observance. And like I felt like I saw various, not just one. I definitely saw Hasidic people. So
Yeah, I think the thing about that, thinking back, is that most of the older guys that were kind of helping me about, um, I think a few of them were sort of like they were heavily acidic, like the long beards and sideburns and all of that. And again, they didn't they weren't interested in being filmed, but they were very quick to help me out of being like, oh, you should go over there, try this street there, and like
yeah,
you can like there'll be some stuff happening there. And I don't know, I couldn't decide if things were just different in this community or if it was because of the day, because it was over Purim, as to why everyone was being so helpful. I wasn't expecting it. So I didn't. I think there was. I think I kind of had interactions with a diverse range, but as far as their actual their personality and their approach towards me, I didn't really notice any difference. But maybe that's maybe,
different degrees of religiosity, you're saying. You didn't see differences in degrees of religiosity.
yeah, and but also no difference uh in their approach towards me as to whether they were more or less suspicious of me, more or less accepting of me. And I guess that's, if you're in kind of a melting pot of community, you're more likely to just kind of take on the prevailing identity.
Yeah. Plus, it helps if you're a complete outsider and a man.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. So if you,
That was that was something. Sorry to talk over you. There's So there's this kind of, I guess, this bizarre disconnect where I'm looking at the footage from New York and you see all the gender segregated kind of areas, and when you're going out on those, so I can't remember the name of the event. I think the bag lighting. Let's say it was the bag lighting, because that event was exactly the same, where all of the women are segregated and separated to the side of the street, and all of the men are like kind of like going down the center of the street. I kind of look at that gender segregation and I'm just like, well, it's part of that community. It's kind of just how it is. But then when I see it, even a glimpse of it, kind of where we are, it seemed so alien to me. Like there was a house of worship that I was shooting outside of, and they had gender segregated entrances and exits. And I shot footage of the signs of it. I think it was on the reel that I sent you. And for whatever reason, even after seeing all of this stuff in New York, to actually kind of see it in person was just, it was almost shocking. Like I accept it kind of intrinsically, because it's just it's part of their culture, and everybody's fine. So let's like I'm quite happy with it. But I don't know. It's almost like looking through your footage. That it's 3,000 miles away. It's almost like it doesn't exist.
yeah, I get that, because I was looking at a picture of a bank that we have in Williamsburg. It's now been converted into a beautiful wedding venue. And there is the old picture shows that the bank was separated by gender. You're like, what? Outrageous. And then
Yeah.
I completely unperturbed when I see gender segregation in the city community. I do get though very upset. I get very upset You know, a lot of the things we film are things that when I was Hasidic, I didn't want to go near because I didn't like feeling excluded. And it
I
almost
can
is like
imagine.
put myself into that exclusion. And then I practically plead with a cameraman to go for me, you know, be my delegate, go in there. I don't, because it's like, if I can't go, be my eyes kind of thing. But
Yeah,
I do think of it as completely normal. And I understand it. I also think there are very nice things to having women spaces. Um,
absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. That's another contentious subject at the minute, apparently.
yeah, that's
Which I didn't ever think that would be controversial, but apparently it is.
yeah, that is. And you know what? When I give tours, I will often talk, especially I had a tour yesterday of a group of 18-year-olds, and we talked about what it is like to be in a space where you're always sexualized, and what does it mean to be in a world where you're not always dealing with opposite gender dynamics. Is it a relief? Does it have its upsides? And
Mm,
I think especially because it's become so contentious, I found the students who are, of course, completely secular, very Western, and very bright, were very open to hearing about it. You know that there's something of merit.
yeah. I mean, to a certain degree, like I guess I'm still sort of surrounded by it a little bit, and I take it for granted, and I just don't notice. Like the town where I live, like it's not Catholic, but it's kind of like old school kind of Church of England history to it. And there's two high schools in town, one for the girls, one for the boys. And
Oh, really? Did
yeah,
you go to a gender segregated high school?
no, the one that I went to was mixed because I haven't always lived in this town.
Are you planning to come to New York?
It's always on the cards. Yeah. So New York's one that I've gone back and forth on. Because I would absolutely love to come, but I'm utterly terrified of all the politics and everything that go on over there. Which is probably dumb. Because things over here are just as stupid, and at the same time they exist like that. You don't notice them in everyday life. Like it's just one of those things. Um, but yeah, it's definitely on the cards. So, but I've never been to the US full stop. So and I've got there's a lot of places I want to go to. But yeah, New York in particular, like there's something about uh just wanted to wander around and see all these kind of snapshots of the thousands of films that I've watched over the years from there. I mean, I sent you that I there was we had any time that you're on Lee or Bedford and you walk over the BQE, I almost get like little flutters in my stomach like this. And I know that
Pinpoint
whole
what you're talking about. Round out what you're talking about.
yeah, so that and I know that kind of like the history of the BQE as far as the community goes is likely a thoroughly negative one. But it was a time during my undergraduate degree. I was studying it was a film by Sufjan Stevens, who's he's known as a musician primarily, but he made this short film to be shown at a museum in I think it was in Brooklyn. I wish I remembered which one. And the whole album was a conceptual album based around the BQE. And I'd studied this film to write this 4,000 word essay to, and watched it over and over and over again, and I just kind of like fallen in love with all of these visuals. So as soon as I see like just a little bit of like concrete or moving cars or something from the BQE, I get this little kind of like sort of sense memory thing of being younger and more vibrant and staying up too late and getting up too early.
It's it's a very creative way of showing a highway. I mean, come on, showing a highway is probably the most miserable subject. We have a lot of women with hula hoops in it, right? It's a
Yeah.
filmmaker, but was very creative in telling its story visually, completely out of left field.
Yeah, very much so.
Called
I
literally BQE, right?
yeah, the whole album was called BQE. And it was essentially like the album played from start to finish, but put to these visuals that he'd shot on an old an old sort of 60s video camera. So it was all shot on like original film and spliced together in his basement, and it's even the way that the film was made has got this kind of romanticism about it.
Yeah. I sometimes hear from people on my tours, they'll say, "Oh, I saw this on in film. Like I saw there's apparently a film where someone runs under the train tracks. There's like a chase scene, and people will be like, "Oh, here I am seeing what I saw in film. There's something a moment. What are you seeing?"
You had this sort of sense memory. I mean, it's part of why we're finding that kind of video and film and everything is just so strong, because you tip like primarily we're very visual beings. Like that's how we learn and remember things, and um, so they do make like really strong kind of like lasting, striking impressions.
That is true. That's why visual storytelling is so powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can I ask you, because I was thinking about this the other day, and I wasn't it was something I've never approached with you. I don't know exactly when you left. At what point did you start to kind of take in like actual kind of modern popular culture? At what point did you have access to that, and what was that kind of experience like for you? Because I can't imagine like not having access to that kind of films and TV and music and stuff from like day one. Like I can't imagine what it must be like for all of that to suddenly just start flooding in.
Yeah. I think the first movie I watched, we were on a bus going on a trip. It was a whole group of Hasidic people, but there were children with disabilities, and in order to entertain them, they played Baby Day Out, which I
That
watched.
was the first film you saw.
Yeah. Years later, I watched I read the reviews, and people were saying it's horrible, and I was so upset. It was like some sacred, important moment in my life had been destroyed. But that was that was maybe one of three films I watched as a child. Nothing.
Yeah.
The other film I watched was Gangsters of New York.
That's a bit of a contrast, isn't it?
It was terrible. I was so traumatized by it. I didn't know anything about film, so we went to the Walmart and grabbed the first thing that
Gangs of New York. You went from Baby's Day Out to Daniel Day-Lewis.
I was absolutely horrified. I was so upset. I know to this day I think I wouldn't watch Gangsters of New York if
No.
it's not my kind of thing.
Oh no.
I think I'm missing big pieces of secular culture. It took maybe 8 years for people to stop being like, "Oh, you don't know this and this," which is very annoying.
Oh yeah, but that's it. That never goes away. People, and I try to take it as a positive, because people delight in telling you things that you don't know and new things. I think that's the same for everybody. Like they want their favorite thing to be your favorite thing.
Yeah, and what they know, even if they just found it out, seems to them like they've known it forever. I found what I'm saying is I found that when I see like I have a very close relative who's OTD, who also left, who didn't know who Helen was it Helen Keller? I don't remember. Didn't know a major icon that everyone knows of. And I'm like, what? And
yeah.
I'm doing the same thing.
Are you so something like Helen Keller, who I guess is a historical figure? Is the community sheltered from that kind of thing? Like, are they sheltered from that side of sort of popular culture?
Well, the girls not. We had it
No.
our school curriculum, but the boys will very often not know these things because they're studying the Torah and the Talmud, so they get a lot less secular education. And this is very controversial, by the way. This is when we were working on the economy video. It was
what made that was a lot of that one made my fingers bleed. There was a lot of work that went into that one.
I know. I felt like you were being dragged through the process, kicking and screaming.
You know what? It does me good to kind of have these back and forths, because as much as, because I have to suppress like this stupid inner artist where I'm just like, no, 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 what I've done is perfect, everything is fine, you don't need any changes. But it's like, well, this isn't your piece, this is someone else's piece. So like, you it's striking a balance between deciding what you think is best for the piece and what you actually think is just best for you because that's how you like it. And that's kind of like an argument that I'm constantly having with my ego, and, and trying not to
To
get
be
mad
fair,
about things.
with the economy segment, it wasn't really. I redid the whole thing from scratch, so
Yeah, yeah.
it wasn't entirely like you were left to come along with where I was going. But it is very hard to work with other people's content. I feel bad for anyone who's behind the
I
scenes
mean,
for someone else.
yeah. I mean, I like being, I like kind of being a part, like a part of this kind of thing. Like, I mean, there's another client that I do all of their kind of like longer edits on YouTube, and it's very different subject to what we do. All like the dog training side of things. You're learning, you have to learn a certain sort of set of rules as to what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And I was kind of it was daunting going into your videos, not knowing anything about the culture, as to, is this okay to show, is this not okay to show, like what are the rules here. But I feel like over the course of the year I've kind of gotten a grasp on at least the basics of what's allowed, what the best way is to kind of show the community in a respectful light. As time goes on, you kind of get used to, you're it's very much been an education. And I feel like without the collaboration, I would lose that side of it, and it's part of it that I very much enjoy.
By the way, are you a much better dog owner because you work on the
Oh
dog
yeah,
training? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So like a lot of the reason that I got so heavily into it was because our dog was such a nightmare. And I feel like
How old's your dog?
He's 2.5 now. And we adopted him at 9 months. So it's really only been, we've had him for about just over 2 years, I think, just under 2 years.
I was just about
Um,
to say she, by the way. I'm so glad I didn't say
I
that.
know, I know, I know, I know.
First time I heard Riley, I imagined Riley is a female dog, and now the dog is.
I'd never really thought about it. It's not a common name over here either, so I don't even know where the name kind of came from. I'd never thought of it as I'd never thought of it as just a girl's name, but I don't know. It works for him.
Yeah, but
But
is
yeah, oh yeah, he's a hell of a lot better. So he's a bull terrier. So we had lots of issues with like aggression. Not towards people, absolute sweetheart with people and kids and everything, but other dogs, like he would get very, very riled up. But I mean, this just 18 months later, and we're walking freely in the fields with him off lead and everything like that. So it's night and day. I actually feel like after training him, I would be a much better parent than than I would have been 2 years ago.
it translates?
It does. We all learn the same way. You do good, you get paid. You do bad, you get punished. Like that's how everything works.
I hope that my parenting isn't judged by my dog's situation because
No, well, like most people have bad dogs because they're too busy to look to do all of that stuff. Like we don't have kids, so like it's I can pour. I was able to pour kind of like an hour and a half a day into him for 2 years just to get him right. Like that's just
yeah.
kind of how it goes. Most people have a dog because it's just becomes like a hungry piece of furniture. But anyway, what I was kind of getting at before going into dog training, as I want to do, was that part of the love of doing these kind of collaborations, as much as it can from time to time be like pulling teeth because we're kind of arguing over kind of like the minutiae of things, is that if unless I do that, I don't learn anything. And really, that's kind of once all of this stuff is said and done, all I can really come away from is that is kind of new knowledge that I didn't have before. So I always kind of appreciate these the sort of the nagging details and the going back and forth in retrospect, even if I don't appreciate it at the time.
The translations and this isn't what gets me is when we show front and center non-Hasidim. Like that to me is something I have to say, don't pick on it. Because there are often, like when we're in Williamsburg, we're supposed to show locals and we're showing interactions with non-Hasidim, which you might not recognize is non-Hasidim. And none of my viewers seem to, and the Hasidim who watch don't seem to care, but I care. And I have to learn to not, okay, let it go, let it go. I'll give you an example. Before Sukkot, we were at that market and people were talking to us and they were telling us the prices.
Yes.
So there was this guy who had an Israeli accent.
Yes, yeah.
Also in my trailer, I think. And he's wearing a small yarmulke that has a design on it. So that's one tell. He doesn't have a beard. He has an Israeli accent, not a Yiddish accent. So he's not from the community.
It's the $300 guy, the one that's got the S-rig that's $300. It's apparently hiding in his jacket. The inclusion of that in the end was part of a montage of you going around asking people for the prices of things, and it just kind of kept going up and up and up, and it it ended with someone presenting you like this giant I mean, they said it was an S-rig, but it was enormous.
It was enormous. I don't know, how is it possible? I
think the woman that was talking to you about it was French. I think she was maybe a French immigrant.
That's good. That's good. You could tell that she wasn't from the community, could you?
Oh yeah, 100%. And you asked her how much it was, and you said, and she said like $100. And these prices have been going up and up and up. And then the very end of that bit, you turned, and I don't know if it was intending to be funny, but I think it was just the way it was cut. You turned to the camera and you said, "Well, I bought $40."
I thought I was gonna show the camera buying stuff.
Yeah, and you didn't buy anything.
I didn't buy anything. I was pretty glad to go home with my $40 instead of that giant S-rig I have no use for. So what do you think I need to do to improve the project? What do you want to see going forward?
Oh, don't put me on the spot like that.
Okay, I'm not putting you on the spot.
I rely on you to get paid. It's like you say, like a lot of the things that kind of that hinge on the improvement hinges on is really you kind of having more access to things, and that comes from that. Maybe that comes in time from exposure. The more people kind of like know about you and almost kind of feel safe around you. But it seems like you've been doing the tours for a long time, and you're still kind of in this position where people are very kind of tense about kind of like letting you into things.
Yeah.
And yet, when you do get those opportunities, those videos do really well, and they're never even necessarily like a chore to edit. They're never like a really kind of difficult job for me. Like the Pearl interview, like all of Pearl's videos, like they're pretty straightforward edits. But that was the first one that went absolutely nuts for you.
Yeah.
And people seem to love having this kind of access that they didn't have before.
I think Pearl in particular is very special.
Yeah, 100%. But when I come to New York, I definitely want to. I would love to meet her. Because there's something about her that just comes through the screen. Maybe that's why those ones work so well.
Yeah, but I do think there's also a hunger for direct access.
Yeah, but then every time we see another video that does a stupid disservice to the community, that seems to kind of push these opportunities further and further away from you, which is thoroughly unfair.
Yeah, and it also interestingly will get so much more attention. Like if I wanted to tell a sensational story of breaking away, I wouldn't have to work 100th time as hard as I work now. You know, it's not easy walking around and getting rejected again and again by people.
Yeah.
it's nice when people are friendly, but there's a lot of rejection. I once actually stood at the street corner and I just decided to try to ask people a question.
Mm,
It was so humiliating. I said, I'm never doing that again. Is that everyone
yeah,
by looking like, no.
it's difficult. It interests me, like the difference over there with considering like the stuff that I'd shot in Manchester, and then going back to see your footage of you asking kids questions like on Purim, like what you dressed up as and stuff like that, and they're just like just stuck silent and they just don't want to talk or say anything. They're so incredibly shy in front of the camera. Whereas one of those kids, the same age that I'd have been talking to, was practically begging to be on camera. Like it's
I know.
um
It reminds me of sometimes we'll have these kids who live in the neighborhood who are not Jewish. Like I remember once there were these three black kids who were coming home from school. Can we be in your footage?
mm,
Why don't more people ask us to be in the footage?
yeah. Yeah, it's almost like you're waiting for the big events to roll through, like the fairgrounds and stuff, they're almost forced to be on film because no one can get away from you.
Yeah, I know. But I don't know because there's so much filming internally now for media at weddings.
Yeah,
It's what's the big deal if you're going to be in my video? And yet I
yeah.
simultaneously completely understand it.
But it's also, I mean, if you're so worried about people misrepresenting you, why wouldn't you take the opportunity to tell your story rather than letting someone else do it for you? It's that side of it seems bizarre to me.
Yeah, because people are not so worried about being misrepresented. They're more worried about what's happening internally in the community and not being the center of gossip. I think that's what's going on.
Mm.
I would
It's almost
argue
like it's a social pressure thing.
it's a social pressure, an internal social pressure. People are very inwardly focused. They are not as concerned about what's going on the outside as they are concerned with status in the community, their children's place in schools, their children's matches, their businesses depend on good standing in the community. I think it's one of the sort of darker sides of the community. It's what I don't miss at all. But when you talk to Pearl, she's like, what are you talking about peer pressure? I don't know anything about peer pressure. She totally disagrees with my take, but that's how I see it. That's my take.
Yeah.
Mostly peer pressure.
Yeah, there was a lot of her stuff where I was just like, I feel like a lot of her experience is just because she doesn't worry herself about those things, as opposed to them not existing.
Yeah. I do, when I talk to Pearl, have the distinct impression that I am a warrior, you know? I walk away feeling like, man, I worry about stuff I wish I could not worry about.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense, but I think we've all got this kind of like base level of anxiety around different things.
That is true. Well, anything else you want to say?
I mean, there was one thing that I noticed about the footage of the kids in Manchester. I was expecting the kind of everybody dressed as Jobs thing,
Oh,
and
because
and
in
there
New York,
was
everyone was wearing costumes of.
yeah, and there was a bunch of that. There was some guys dressed as like baggage handlers and stuff. They were in the orange. They had EasyJet written on their back, which is like an airline over here.
Oh,
Um, and there was a lot of that, but then I mean a lot of it felt more like kind of Halloween. Like they've got this exposure to popular culture where they're dressing up as like popular characters, like the two kids, two brothers side by side that were dressed up as they're called Ninjago, which is like it's a Lego, it's a Lego thing. And so I didn't I yeah I was I wasn't expecting them to have that kind of exposure to popular culture, particularly that young. After having seen kind of like all the kids in your neighborhood as to kind of like what they enjoy dressing up as.
this year, though, in New York, we saw a lot fewer work costumes, and we saw a lot more internal distinction costumes.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah, because there was a lot of commentary about the about dressing up as the different sects, and like there's this sort of, I can't remember the name of it, but this hippie-ish kind of
Yeah,
sect
the
that everyone
Breslov
was
set.
dressing up as. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
also Chabad. They also dress up as Chabad, which is considered more open.
Are there any of those kind of communities around where you are?
Yeah, there are.
Yeah. Is that ever something that you've thought about investigating?
That's what we're gonna do in a one-day visit. We're gonna go because I really owe my listeners and you, because you need an education yourself,
I do.
in the differences in sects. Which it's strange that I've done so much work without explaining the differences in sects. A part of why I haven't done it is because I'm so nervous about doing it justice. Because there are some sects I know really well, and other sects maybe I have more of a distance view. People have even said you said things that are insensitive because that comes from being at a distance, like Chabad. So I'm hoping that,
Yeah, we've gone very heavy on Satmar,
yeah,
because I think a lot of that was coming from the talks with Pearl, because it's difficult to not kind of like talk about that sect and kind of like what it means to its people when you've got someone there talking about it so passionately. Like it's so that one's pretty heavily covered, but um, as far as the others go, I haven't got the slightest idea.
yeah. Well, Satmar is actually the largest sect. So
Mm,
as far as that's what I've read. It's hard to keep track, but Satmar is an enormous sect and very powerful and very important. But it's also the most closed, so it's the most interesting by my measure.
yeah, and
Objective.
it's got the best lore as well, with like the feuding brothers and
Yeah.
everything like that. Like I'd love to go. I want to visit the the temple that was never finished. Like
Oh yeah.
I'm
Unfinished.
just, yeah.
It's one of New York City's longest standing incomplete projects. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also didn't sort of realize sort of how recent that was. Like, I
Fighting.
think when you, yeah, well, like when you're talking about these things, I always think of them in sort of like historical ideas. I'm like, ah, well, that'll be something like back in the 60s or the 70s or something. But it's sort of in the last sort of 15, 20 years.
Yeah. I know that was
Yeah.
I wasn't very I didn't put a date on it, I think, when I talked about the bug life, which is when we first brought it up.
Mm,
How do you feel about coming to New York and filming here?
I'd love to. Yeah, I would savor that footage forever. Something to tick off the bucket list.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. How much of that time I would spend in Williamsburg, I don't know. I'd be wanting to kind of take in everything and anything all at once.
Yeah, it's a big city. It's a big city. There's lots.
Yeah, yeah. Although I think probably generally like the Brooklyn kind of area feels more so like a spiritual home to me than any of the other parts of it.
Well, you let me know when you're coming. I'll be your tour guide. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much. And for all your lovely work. You do such beautiful work, and you do it all pretty much on your own, which,
Yeah, I try my best with some kicking and chasing here and there.
yeah, just a little bit, just a little bit. Nothing too bad. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Maybe we'll do our next video will be in New York when you're coming. I don't
Yeah.
travel anywhere. I don't like to travel. I like when people come to me. I don't like to go anywhere. I have no appetite to travel, which
Oh
is
no, it's something I'd love to do but never have the time. Yeah, but I mean, I work pretty much exclusively from a laptop now, so there's no reason not to.
yeah. Well, all right. I'm gonna send you this. It goes to you first. I'll send you the footage.
Yeah, yeah.